In the heart of a faraway land, there was a beautiful kingdom called Lilama. The rivers flowed like silver, the trees danced in the wind, and the people sang as they worked. Lilama was a place of peace, where children laughed freely and no one went hungry. Their joy came from a wise and gentle ruler, King Malui. The king was loved by all. He was fair, strong, and kind. He visited villages, helped the poor, and listened to everyone, even the smallest child. In the royal palace lived his only son, Prince Zuberi. He was just 10 years old. Zuberi was clever but playful. He loved to chase butterflies, play tricks on the palace guards, and sneak into the royal kitchen to steal mangoes. He had a big heart and always smiled, but he never thought about becoming king, not yet. One sunny afternoon, everything changed. The palace gates suddenly closed. The drums that usually played joyful music stopped. A strange silence fell over Lilama. King Malui had fallen sick, very sick. Doctors rushed into the palace. The queen, Mwana, sat by the king's bed, holding his hand with tears in her eyes. Nothing helped. The king's strong voice had become a whisper. His warm hands were now cold. Some began to whisper that he had been poisoned, but no one knew for sure. Zuberi stood outside the king's room, confused and scared. He had never seen his father so weak. He didn't understand why everyone was crying. Later that evening, the royal elders gathered in a dark hall. Their faces were full of worry. There was no other prince, no brother, no uncle, only Zuberi. One elder finally said in a quiet voice, "The boy must be crowned." The queen gasped. The palace guards looked at each other in shock. "He's just a child," someone whispered. "He's all we have," another replied. That night, while the stars watched in silence, young Zuberi lay in his bed. His hands trembled as he held his favorite toy, a wooden lion carved by his father. He didn't sleep. He didn't smile. He cried, because deep down he knew tomorrow he would wear his father's crown. The sun rose slowly over the kingdom of Lilama, but it didn't feel like a normal day. There were no cheers, no music, only the sound of footsteps, many footsteps, marching toward the palace. It was coronation day. In the great hall, filled with red carpets and golden banners, the people gathered. Nobles wore long, shiny robes. Warriors stood tall with spears in their hands. The royal council sat in silence, watching. And then a small boy entered, Prince Zuberi, just 10 years old. He wore a heavy white robe and shiny gold sandals. A crown sat on a red pillow in front of the throne. His tiny hands were shaking. As Zuberi walked toward the steps of the throne, his foot caught the edge of his robe, and he stumbled. Gasps filled the hall. Some nobles laughed quietly. Others leaned toward each other and whispered, "This child will ruin us." A boy on the throne? We're finished. Zuberi stood back up. His face turned red, but he didn't cry. He kept walking, one step at a time, until he reached the throne. The crown was placed on his head. It was too big and far too heavy. The people clapped, but without joy. The air felt cold. Even though Zuberi was now king, no one truly believed in him. Not yet. Days passed. The royal council began giving orders in his name. They acted like Zuberi was a puppet, just a boy sitting in a big chair. They never asked what he thought. They made decisions for him while he sat quietly, swinging his little legs. But Zubri was not just sitting. He was watching. He was listening. Every whisper, every lie, every secret. One evening, Zubri sat alone in the garden, staring at the stars. His mother, Queen Mwana, came and sat beside him. She gently placed a hand on his shoulder. Zubri looked up with tears in his eyes. "Mama," he whispered, "I don't think I can do this." She wiped his cheek and said softly, "Even kings cry, my son, but real kings rise after their tears." Zubri nodded. He didn't speak again that night, but something inside him had changed. He began reading old scrolls. He listened carefully during council meetings. He watched how people acted when they thought no one noticed. He still couldn't lift his father's sword, but deep inside, his heart was already growing heavier than any blade. The crown sat on Zubri's head, but power? That lived in the shadows. One of those shadows had a name, Lord Bako. He was one of the oldest nobles in the kingdom, and one of the greediest. He smiled in front of the young king, but whispered lies behind his back. He wanted to control Zubri, to turn the kingdom into his personal treasure chest. But outside the palace, a greater danger was growing. The rains didn't come that season. The sky stayed dry. The rivers thinned. The crops failed. A drought had come to Lulama. People began to starve. Markets were empty. Mothers had nothing to feed their babies. And when people are scared, they look for someone to blame. And they blamed Zubri. This child king brought bad luck, some said. We need a real ruler, not a boy in a crown, others whispered. Zubri heard their words. But what hurt more was not knowing what to do. One night, while the guards were asleep, Zubri took off his crown, wrapped himself in a plain cloth, and sneaked out of the palace. He walked through the dusty streets. No one recognized him. He passed a woman begging for water, a baby crying, men sitting by broken farms with empty bowls. And then he saw a boy about his own age. He sat under a tree, holding a cracked bowl. His eyes were sharp. His stomach was thin, but his voice was strong. Zubri sat beside him and shared the small food he had snuck from the palace kitchen. The boy took it, stared at him, and said, "You talk like you live behind golden walls." Zubri stayed quiet. The boy continued, "What good is a king if his people cry?" Those words hit Zubri like a storm. He didn't answer. He simply nodded, stood up, and walked back to the palace, with a new weight in his heart. That night, he didn't sleep on his silk sheets. He laid on the cold palace floor, looked up at the ceiling, and whispered, "Father, show me how to fix this." The palace was quiet that morning, but Zubri's mind was loud, buzzing with memories. He sat alone in the royal library, flipping through old scrolls. Then he stopped. His fingers touched the edge of a faded paper, a map. It was old, torn, drawn by a farmer long ago. Suddenly, Zubri remembered something his father once said. "There are rivers beneath us, Zubri, ancient veins of water the land forgot. When the skies are silent, the earth still speaks, if you dare to listen." His eyes lit up. Could it be true? Zubri called for the royal builders. He pointed to a dry patch of land just beyond the palace walls. "Dig here," he said. The men looked at each other, confused. Some laughed. There's nothing there but dust. The boy is dreaming again. But Zuberi stood tall. Dig, he said again. And so they dug. 1 day passed. 2, 3. The sun scorched. The people stared and whispered. Waste of time. Childish nonsense. Let the boy play with dirt. But on the 7th day, something changed. The workers hit rock, then mud, then whoosh. Water exploded from the ground, clear and cold, spraying into the sky like a miracle. People screamed with joy. They danced. They cried. They ran to fill pots and buckets. Children splashed and laughed for the first time in weeks. Zuberi stood beside the gushing spring, soaked and smiling. And in that moment, he was just 10 years old. But 10,000 hearts beat for him. The people didn't see a boy anymore. They saw a king. Inside the palace, Lord Baco watched from behind a curtain. His face twisted. His hands clenched. His grip on the kingdom was slipping. And the boy he once called foolish was now becoming unstoppable. The palace should have been preparing for celebration. The Festival of Moons, Lalama's most joyful day, was only a few nights away. But instead of music, the halls echoed with fear. Zuberi's most trusted guard, Captain Omari, was found lying beside the garden wall. Cold, still, poisoned. The boy king sat frozen beside his body. This wasn't a mistake. This was a message. Queen Juana clutched Zuberi's hand, tears running down her cheeks. Omari protected you like his own son, she whispered. But there was more. Tucked inside Omari's cloak was a scroll, sealed with a black raven. Zuberi broke it open. His eyes scanned the words, and his heart sank. At the Festival of Moons, the boy king will fall. The throne will rise again under Lord Baco. Zuberi looked up, fists trembling. The truth was clear. Lord Baco, who smiled in meetings, who bowed with fake respect, was the traitor. He had poisoned the king's father. He had poisoned Omari. And now, he planned to steal the throne during the festival. Queen Juana paced the room, panicked. We must leave. Tonight. I will hide you far in the mountains. We will come back when it's safe. But Zuberi shook his head. Tears welled up in his eyes, but they did not fall. He stood tall, looked straight into his mother's face, and said, If I run now, I'll never stop running. A king does not run. Not from danger. Not from destiny. Queen Juana reached to hold him, but he stepped forward, his voice steady. They will not steal my crown, or my people's future. Outside, the moon hung full in the sky. The stars blinked quietly, and deep beneath the palace floors, the trap was being set. But what Lord Baco didn't know was this. Zuberi was no longer just a boy with a crown. He was a king with a plan. The Festival of Moons had arrived. The drums of Lalama echoed through the village. Fires blazed. Lanterns floated in the sky like glowing dreams. But deep inside the palace, Zuberi felt a storm building. He knew Lord Baco would strike today. The king stood behind the stage curtain, dressed in gold and white. His crown shimmered, but his heart beat like a war drum. Then screams. Chaos. Lord Baco stormed the stage with armed men. The boy is not fit to rule, he shouted to the crowd. The throne belongs to me. Guards grabbed Zuberi. People gasped. Some tried to run, but Zuberi stepped forward, unarmed. His voice shook, but it rang clear. I may be young, but I love this land with all my heart. I have felt your hunger. I have walked your dusty roads, and I will not let fear rule us ever again. Lord Bako laughed. You're just a child. But before he could speak another word, a small stone flew through the air and hit one of Bako's guards. Then another, and another. It was Komi, followed by dozens of village children. Leave our king alone, Komi yelled. Soon, villagers were pouring forward, fathers, mothers, elders. No weapons, just courage. And then, the royal guards turned. They stepped away from Bako. They surrounded Zuberi. They raised their spears in salute. Lord Bako tried to run, but it was too late. He was grabbed, arrested. The people chanted louder and louder. Long live King Zuberi! Long live King Zuberi! And through the cheers and the rising sun, Zuberi stood tall, tears in his eyes, crown shining like fire. He didn't win the kingdom with a sword. He won it with courage. And from that day on, the drums of Lalama didn't just play for kings. They played for a boy who became a legend. The sun rose gently over Lalama. The fields were green again. The rivers sang. Children laughed in the streets. Peace had returned. And in the center of it all stood King Zuberi, no longer just the boy who wore the crown, but the young man who had earned it. But Zuberi didn't rule from a high throne, far from the people. He did something no king before him had ever done. He created a council of voices, a circle of wise elders and young dreamers. Old or young, rich or poor, he said. Every voice matters in a kingdom that wants to grow. And every month, Zuberi visited the villages, walking dusty paths, sitting under mango trees, laughing with farmers, listening to mothers, and always, always, with Komi beside him. The poor boy who once challenged him had now become his closest friend and advisor. And so the years passed, and Zuberi grew. Not just in age, but in heart, in wisdom, in strength. Now he sat beneath the great baobab tree, the place where he first dreamed of being more. He was 30 years old. His crown still shone, but now his shoulders were broader, his eyes deeper. He watched children play. He saw their hope, and he smiled. The hardest thing I ever did, he whispered, was believe in myself before the world did. He picked up a small carved lion his father had once given him, closed his eyes, and spoke one final truth. True kings are not born. They are forged in silence, in fire, and in love. Headphone final emotional hook. He was crowned at 10, but became king the day he chose his people over fear. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories. Turn on your notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.